There's something powerful about a man who has been alone for a long time, not lonely, but alone, and through that solitude, he becomes something entirely different. When a man spends an extended period of time single, especially after being a husband, one of the most profound changes he undergoes is the development of deep self-sufficiency. In marriage, many responsibilities, emotional, logistical, or even financial, are shared or delegated. There's a natural dependency that forms, even in the healthiest of partnerships. But once a man finds himself alone again, that support system is gone, and it's in this absence that true self-reliance is born. He begins to take full accountability for every part of his life. There's no one to remind him of appointments, no one to help cook dinner, no one to clean up after the chaos of daily life. The structure that was once shared must now be created entirely by him, and at first this can feel overwhelming. He might stumble, forget things, or feel the heavy weight of being on his own. But slowly he adapts. He learns to cook, not just to survive, but to enjoy the process of nourishing himself. He organizes his space, not for someone else's approval, but because he realizes how much his environment affects his peace of mind. He handles his finances with clarity and control, because he knows no one else is going to step in and manage it for him. This self-sufficiency bleeds into every area of his life. Decisions are no longer filtered through someone else's needs or preferences. He doesn't wait for permission to pursue a goal or make a change. He acts, he moves, he leads his own life, and with every task he masters on his own, his confidence grows. Not the loud, boastful kind, but a quiet, grounded confidence that comes from knowing he can stand on his own 2 feet. He begins to enjoy the solitude. It no longer feels like isolation. It feels like sovereignty. He doesn't need someone else to make him feel complete because he realizes he already is. The longer he's single, the more this self-sufficiency becomes ingrained in him, and it's something that no one can take away. When a man becomes single after being a husband, one of the most transformative shifts he experiences is the rediscovery of his own identity. In a long-term relationship or marriage, it's easy, almost inevitable, for parts of who he is to slowly fade into the background. It doesn't always happen dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle. One hobby gets shelved to make room for shared activities. A personal goal is postponed because it doesn't align with family responsibilities. The music he loves, the friends he used to spend time with, the dreams he once chased. Many of these things get quietly sacrificed for the sake of the relationship. Over time, this compromise can become a kind of erosion. He starts to forget what truly excites him, what drives him, what makes him feel alive. His identity becomes intertwined with his role as a husband and perhaps a father, and he becomes defined more by what he provides for others than by who he is at his core. But when that relationship ends, whether through divorce, separation, or loss, he's left standing alone, often confused, wondering who he is without that role. This can be disorienting, even painful, but it's also where the rediscovery begins. He starts reconnecting with the parts of himself that were buried. Maybe he picks up a guitar that's been gathering dust in the corner. Maybe he returns to the gym, not out of obligation, but because he wants to feel strong again. He might take long drives with no destination, just to feel the freedom of moving without having to consult anyone. He revisits old books, old friends, old passions, and in doing so, he begins to remember what it was like before he compromised so much of himself. This rediscovery isn't just about revisiting the past, it's also about redefining the future. He starts to ask himself, what do I want now? What kind of man do I want to be? Without the constant noise of someone else's expectations or emotional needs, he can finally hear his own voice clearly again. It's in this space of solitude and silence that a man begins to rebuild his sense of identity from the inside out. He no longer feels the need to perform or please. He doesn't shape himself to fit someone else's mold. Instead, he starts living in alignment with his own values, his own pace, his own desires. And as he does this, his energy shifts. He becomes more grounded, more centered, and far less willing to lose himself in another person again. The rediscovery of his identity becomes the foundation for a new life, not one shaped by the past, but one built on who he truly is when no one else is defining him. One of the most overlooked but powerful changes that happens when a man remains single for an extended period, especially after being a husband, is the mastery of emotional discipline. In relationships, emotions are often externalized. A man may react quickly to conflict, get drawn into emotional turbulence, or find himself constantly trying to manage someone else's moods alongside his own. There's a shared emotional ecosystem that, while sometimes supportive, can also be draining and chaotic. But when he becomes single, the emotional noise quiets down, and for the first time in a long time, he's left alone with his thoughts, his feelings, and his internal battles. This silence can be uncomfortable. At first, he may struggle with loneliness, regret, guilt, or even anger. These emotions don't have a place to go. There's no one else to project them onto, no one to argue with, and no one to distract him. He's forced to confront them directly. This is where the real work begins. Through solitude, he starts to develop an awareness of his emotional patterns. He recognizes when he's triggered, what his insecurities are, and how he's been conditioned to react. Without someone constantly pressing emotional buttons, he learns how to sit with discomfort rather than immediately trying to fix it, escape it, or dump it onto someone else. He learns to pause before reacting. That pause becomes a powerful tool. He starts journaling or meditating, not because it's trendy, but because he's searching for clarity and control. He reflects more. He observes his thoughts. Over time, he realizes that emotions are signals, not commands. Just because he feels something doesn't mean he has to act on it. He doesn't explode in anger like he used to. He doesn't chase validation when he feels insecure. He doesn't crumble when he feels lonely. Instead, he faces it all with calm, with awareness, and with self-respect. This discipline extends to how he handles rejection, disappointment, or even the desire for companionship. He stops seeking temporary relief through meaningless distractions. He no longer lets lust, attention, or neediness drive his decisions. He becomes more selective, not just with people, but with the energy he allows into his life. He realizes that peace is expensive, and not everyone can afford it. So he guards it with a new kind of strength. Eventually, his emotional discipline becomes part of who he is. It's not about suppressing feelings, it's about managing them with maturity and presence. He doesn't get pulled into every storm. He watches, he listens, he processes, and then he decides how to respond. This makes him dangerous in best way, not because he's cold or detached, but because he's no longer ruled by impulse or emotional chaos. He becomes a man in control of himself, and that's a rare kind of power. As time goes on, and a man remains single after being in a serious relationship or marriage, one of the most noticeable transformations is the dramatic shift in his standards, especially when it comes to women, relationships, and the kind of energy he allows into his life. When a man first becomes single, there might be a period of confusion or vulnerability where he still longs for connection or companionship. He may still carry remnants of old patterns, seeking validation, craving intimacy, or falling into the trap of familiarity, even if it's unhealthy. But as time passes and he begins to heal, evolve, and regain his sense of self, something profound starts to happen. He stops settling completely. He begins to recognize the cost of giving his energy to the wrong person. He remembers how it felt to be constantly misunderstood, to argue over meaningless things, to feel like he was never enough, or that he had to shrink himself to keep the peace. He recalls how draining it was to walk on eggshells, to suppress his needs, or to justify his value over and over, and he decides, often silently, that he's not going back to that place. That realization becomes the cornerstone of his rising standards. Where he once may have been attracted to surface-level beauty, charm, or excitement, he now looks deeper. He doesn't just ask, is she attractive? He asks, is she peaceful? Is she emotionally intelligent? Does she bring clarity or confusion? Can she sit in silence without creating drama just to feel alive? He starts to see red flags faster, and he doesn't ignore them anymore. The moment he feels manipulation, entitlement, or passive aggression, he distances himself, not with anger or resentment, but with calm indifference. Because his peace has become non-negotiable, his standards rise not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. He has learned, through experience and often pain, that being with the wrong person is far lonelier than being alone. He no longer believes in fixing broken people just to feel needed. He doesn't view relationships as projects, and he certainly doesn't see himself as a savior. He wants a partner, not a patient, someone who adds to his life, not someone who drains it. If a woman doesn't respect his time, his boundaries, or his growth, he doesn't argue. He simply walks away, because he understands that a man who knows his worth doesn't beg to be seen. He becomes intentional with every interaction. Even in casual conversations, he pays attention. How does she speak about others? How does she handle disagreement? Is her femininity rooted in strength or insecurity? He evaluates her mindset, her energy, her consistency. He's not impressed by external validation or curated perfection. He values emotional maturity, accountability, and depth. He seeks alignment, not attachment. This elevation of standards also affects how he carries himself. He no longer overextends to impress anyone. He doesn't explain his silence or over-apologize for having boundaries. He operates with a quiet confidence, knowing that what he offers is rare, and that the right woman will recognize it without him having to convince her. He moves slower, not out of fear, but out of clarity, because he knows what it costs to move fast with the wrong person. He's not afraid of being misunderstood, judged, or left. He'd rather be alone in truth than together in dysfunction. His lifestyle reflects this shift. He invests in his physical health, his mental discipline, his financial goals. He doesn't chase pleasure. He builds legacy. He spends his time on things that nourish his growth, and he surrounds himself with people who respect his evolution. When he meets someone new, it's not about filling a void, it's about evaluating whether she deserves access to the life he's built through pain, patience, and perseverance. Raising his standards isn't about arrogance or being unapproachable. It's about honoring his journey. Every disappointment, every heartbreak, every lesson has shaped him. And now he refuses to lower his standards just to feel wanted. He waits, he watches, he listens, and if she doesn't bring peace, value, and depth, he doesn't hate her, he just knows she's not for him. Because when a man has been through the fire and found peace on the other side, he's willing to protect it at all costs, even if it means staying single a little longer. As a man spends more time single, especially after a long-term marriage or relationship, one of the most profound shifts is his understanding and use of silence. In a relationship, words and actions are often tied to a constant dance of communication, whether it's resolving conflict, seeking validation, or simply filling the space with talk to keep the connection alive. But when a man is alone, he starts to realize that silence is not just a void, but a powerful tool. At first, it might feel uncomfortable or unnatural. Silence can bring up feelings of loneliness or uncertainty, but over time it becomes an ally, one that he learns to appreciate, respect, and even wield with intention. In his silence, he becomes more observant. He no longer feels the need to fill the gaps in conversation just to keep the interaction going. Instead, he watches, he listens, he observes how people behave, what they say, and, more importantly, what they don't say. He begins to understand that silence is a powerful indicator of true feelings, motivations, and intentions. Where once he might have felt the need to speak in every situation, now he's comfortable with the quiet. He's no longer insecure in the absence of words. Silence allows him to think deeply, to process emotions, and to discern the quality of a situation before responding. This change also influences his interactions with women. In the past, he might have rushed to fill every moment of potential discomfort with words, jokes, or validation, trying to keep the atmosphere light and carefree. But now, he stands in the quiet with ease. He's no longer afraid of what a woman might think if he doesn't speak every second. He understands that the right woman will appreciate a man who can sit in silence without feeling the need to constantly entertain or reassure her. His silence no longer stems from insecurity or fear of rejection, it's rooted in confidence. He knows that his value doesn't need to be spoken aloud all the time. It's understood through his actions, his presence, and his ability to remain calm and composed. When conflict arises, this silence becomes even more significant. In past relationships, he may have felt compelled to argue, to defend himself, or to explain himself in a way that would resolve the tension quickly. He might have been afraid of the silence that lingered after a disagreement, fearing it signaled disconnection or abandonment. But now, he's not afraid of space. He understands that silence in the midst of conflict can be a sign of emotional control, a sign that he's not willing to be dragged into the emotional chaos just to win a point. Instead of reacting impulsively, he chooses to withdraw, to step back, to give himself time to think and process. This shift is a form of emotional maturity that only comes with the clarity of being alone for an extended period. He knows that in conflict, his silence doesn't signal weakness. It signals strength and restraint. This new mastery of silence also carries over into his sense of self-respect. In the past, he might have found himself apologizing too often, just to smooth things over or maintain harmony. He may have over-explained himself, over-justified his actions, or offered unnecessary explanations to keep the peace. But now, he doesn't need to over-explain. He doesn't need to apologize for every little thing. He understands that his actions and decisions speak louder than words, and that not every choice requires validation. He chooses to speak only when necessary, and when he does, it's with clarity, purpose, and confidence. He's no longer afraid of silence because he understands that it's in that quiet space that true strength and integrity are revealed. The power of silence also makes him more discerning when it comes to the people he lets into his life. In a relationship, there's often a tendency to fill the silence with conversation, to seek approval, to constantly engage. But as he becomes more comfortable with silence, he starts to evaluate the people around him more carefully. He notices who can handle the quiet, who seeks to create unnecessary drama or conflict, and who values the peace and stillness that comes with maturity. he learns to appreciate the comfort of being with someone who doesn't need to fill every moment with chatter or validation. He realizes that silence can be a reflection of emotional maturity, of deep connection, of understanding without needing to articulate every thought. When he meets someone who can sit with him in quiet ease, he knows that she's someone who truly values him, not just for his words, but for the depth of his being. And finally, in his silence, he learns to reclaim his own inner voice. For so long he may have been accustomed to seeking approval, giving too much of himself away, or bending to the will of others. But now, in the stillness, he hears himself clearly. He remembers who he is without the noise of external influences. This newfound silence gives him the space to think, to reflect, and to make decisions that align with his values and desires, not with the expectations of others. It becomes a tool for self-reflection, self-discovery, and self-respect. He no longer feels the need to justify his existence or actions. He simply lives in a way that feels true to himself. And this quiet confidence is what ultimately makes him stronger, more focused, and more attractive to the right people. Silence becomes a form of self-empowerment, a sign that he is no longer controlled by external pressures or the need to conform. It's a declaration of his autonomy, his inner strength, and his refusal to engage in the emotional noise that once defined his relationships. The longer a man stays single, particularly after having been a husband or in a long-term relationship, the more he becomes dangerous, not in a violent or reckless sense, but in a way that others can't quite predict. It's a kind of danger that comes from clarity, confidence, and emotional strength. A man who has spent significant time alone has learned how to stand on his own 2 feet, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. He no longer needs constant validation, nor does he crave attention or external approval. His self-worth isn't dependent on the opinions or presence of others. He has learned to navigate the world independently, and that independence is both his greatest strength and his quiet power. This self-reliance is something that doesn't go unnoticed by those around him. People, whether friends, family, or potential romantic interests, can feel the shift in his energy. They sense that he is no longer someone who can be easily manipulated, swayed, or controlled. He no longer chases after anyone or anything. He doesn't seek out relationships out of loneliness or a desire to fill a void. Instead, he chooses his connections with a level of discernment that most people haven't developed. This makes him an unpredictable force because he's no longer operating from a place of need. He doesn't pursue others in an attempt to complete himself. He is whole as he is, and anyone who enters his life will need to add to it, not fill it. There is a profound mental toughness that comes from being able to face long periods of solitude. A man who is alone for extended stretches of time learns to deal with his inner demons without distracting himself through relationships, substance abuse, or emotional drama. He has no choice but to confront his weaknesses, his insecurities, his pain, and over time he transforms them into sources of strength. Instead of avoiding difficult emotions, he faces them head on. He learns how to handle his fears, regrets, and past wounds without letting them dictate his actions or define his future. This emotional discipline, built over time, is what makes him dangerous. He is no longer vulnerable to manipulation, emotional highs and lows, or other people's agendas. He can sit in discomfort, process it, and then move forward with clarity. This emotional fortitude makes him a rock in the storm of life, unshakable, calm, and in control. Another aspect of this danger comes from his refusal to settle. The longer he's been single, the more he realizes the true cost of being in a relationship that isn't right. In past relationships, he may have compromised, made excuses, or ignored red flags because of a desire for connection or intimacy. But after enough time alone, he begins to see through the illusions and games that often accompany relationships. He no longer tolerates emotional manipulation, dishonesty, or shallow connections. His standards rise not because he is arrogant or demanding, but because he now fully understands the importance of protecting his peace. He knows that being with the wrong person is more damaging than being alone. He doesn't chase after love or companionship. Instead, he waits for someone who aligns with his values, who brings depth to his life, and who respects him for who he truly is. In this period of singleness, he also gains a greater sense of detachment from societal expectations. The longer he is single, the more he frees himself from the pressure to conform to the timeline that others have set for him. People might ask him when he's going to settle down, get married, or start a family, but he no longer feels the need to answer those questions to satisfy others. His life is no longer dictated by societal norms or the pressure to fulfill external expectations. He recognizes that he is the architect of his own life, and he's no longer concerned with meeting the milestones that society deems important. His timeline is his own, and he moves forward with a sense of purpose and autonomy that others often find perplexing. The longer a man remains single, the more his actions become deliberate, calculated, and intentional. He no longer moves through life reacting to external stimuli. He responds thoughtfully to situations, people, and opportunities, taking time to assess each one before deciding how to proceed. His decision-making process is shaped by his personal values, not the fleeting emotions or impulses that once guided him. He knows that every action he takes has consequences, and he takes full responsibility for those choices. This level of mindfulness and responsibility makes him a man who is not easily manipulated or distracted. He is fully present in his life, making decisions that align with his goals, his values, and his vision for the future. Others may see him as mysterious or difficult to understand, but it's only because he no longer allows himself to be defined by anyone else's expectations or desires. Lastly, his silence becomes a form of power. The longer he remains single, the more he learns to sit with discomfort, to embrace the quiet moments, and to find strength in solitude. He no longer feels the need to fill every space with noise, chatter, or distraction. He doesn't seek validation through constant conversation or emotional expression. Instead, he has mastered the art of listening, both to others and to himself. This silence isn't one of withdrawal or detachment. It's a silence born from inner peace and strength. When he speaks, it's with purpose. When he acts, it's with intention. And when he remains silent, it's because he understands the power of restraint, of not reacting impulsively to the noise of the world around him. His silence becomes an armor, a shield that protects his peace, his clarity, and his autonomy. It's a sign that he doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He simply is, and that is enough. As a man continues on this journey of singlehood, his evolution into a more focused, self-aware, and powerful individual is undeniable. The time spent alone allows him to discover his true essence, sharpening his emotional intelligence and fortifying his boundaries. His emotional discipline, heightened standards, and refined sense of self make him a force to be reckoned with, someone who moves through the world with clarity, purpose, and strength. He no longer seeks validation from external sources or chases after fleeting connections. Instead, he values deep, meaningful interactions and relationships that align with his values and enhance his life. His silence, once a void, has now become a powerful tool of reflection, clarity, and decision-making. In this space, he finds his strength, not from the opinions of others, but from his own inner knowing. Ultimately, the longer a man is single, the more he becomes dangerous in the best ways, sufficient, emotionally balanced, and unwavering in his pursuit of what truly matters. He understands the value of being alone, knowing that it is in solitude that he has cultivated the power to choose wisely, act decisively, and live authentically. This man is no longer just surviving, he's thriving, and that quiet confidence, that unshakable foundation, makes him a force that cannot easily be ignored or overlooked.